Hi, this is Catherine Henry. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are back. This is an introduction to one of my most exciting topics. It's XR for entertainment and in particular, immersive storytelling. We have today with me in the studio, Loren Hammond, who is the head of XR or Tribeca Immersive, which is a huge international program, and we're so excited to have him here today. We also have joining us Michel Reilhac, who is dialing in from Amsterdam, and he is the head of the Venice the Venice Film Festival Immersive Program. And last but not least is going to be Tupac Martir, who is the creative genius behind many of the world's leading artists in fashion, music, and performance, and is himself a multimedia XR sensation. But before we start off, I wanted to give you a little bit of context in terms of XR for storytelling. My friends at McKinsey like to discuss XR as trying to describe the experience of television to somebody who has only experienced radio. And I think that's pretty good. But I mean, while I realize that it's a dramatically different medium, here's the thing. Radio is fundamentally passive. It's listening. It's a form of companionship. We hear radio, but we see television. And we know what television is. We know that television shows us things. It invites us to see the world. But the beauty of VR for immersive television is that VR invites you into another world. And so I believe that a much better analogy would be to think about theater, okay? So imagine that you're on the 20th row of a theater and you're in the orchestra. So you're at the same level as the actors, more or less. You've got the orchestra pit in front of you, and then they're actors. And you can see that they're 3D, they're volumetric. You can see them move, you can see them animate, you can see their flesh and their eyes light up as they speak. But can you imagine then jumping onto the stage with them? You're there in between the two actors as they have a big debate or an argument. You can then walk across the stage and you can look over somebody's shoulder as they type out a message and say, hey, listen, I'll be there in 40 minutes. And if that actor then gets up and exits stage left, you can follow them. So the narrative possibilities for creating something that allows you not only to experience what's in the main theater, the main stage, but also this branched narrative to follow somebody off of the set and to follow them into the Uber and overhear their conversation and see what happens next. That is something we've never experienced before, not in television and certainly not radio. So this is why I'm so excited to have the leaders who are really pushing the creative edges by selecting some of the best talent and showcasing them on their very prestigious and well-known forums, such as Tribeca and Venice, and all of the work that Tupac Martir has been doing. So today, I have the great honor of bringing on Loren Hammonds as my first guest to talk about his work with the Tribeca Film Festival. Loren, hi, welcome.
Now, sorry, let me just, yes, hi, Catherine, how are you?
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
I'm great, thanks. It's my absolute pleasure. Now, I know that you have been you had a really very busy time. So I want to say, first of all, congratulations. I mean, the Tribeca Film Festival, you were expecting 150,000 people to celebrate your 19th year. For those of you who are just joining us or who haven't been there, know that this is one of the landmark film festivals in the world. And it was started after I want to say World War II, but something in the World Trade Center, but it was after September 11th.
Yes.
And you've been there for 10 years, and this has never happened before. So you had to go virtual. Tell us what that experience was like, and because you went live within days of announcing that it wouldn't go live. Tell us how that worked.
Sure. So actually, I've been with the festival for 14 years, and in the role of a programmer for 10. It was a very, very difficult time for us, obviously, for many reasons. First of all, of course, we work all year as programmers and curators and producers to plan a big show that we expect everyone to come to enjoy and to, get business done and have great networking and be exposed to great art. And so it was a huge disappointment, obviously, as we saw the pandemic approaching and we saw what was coming for us. But there's so many things that are more important than just putting on a show. And I think part of the Tribeca DNA was something that helped us to quickly kind of say, all right, this is not going to be what we anticipated at the moment, but we need to figure out a way to do to create an effective postponement for our creators, for our filmmakers, for our industry. It's a I think there are so many festivals that are experiencing the same challenges, and then there are festivals that are experiencing uncertainty right now that are off on the horizon, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen in the upcoming months. But what was most important to us was to support the industry and creators. So there were a few things that we put in place to do that. We were able to get our films behind a wall, which we call the extranet, for the industry to be able to see the films. So that would be buyers that are able to see films, to potentially buy them and get business done. Also, we were able to get our jurors. We had an amazing jury this year. We had some really, really established filmmakers and actors. I mean, just Danny Boyle, Lucas Hedges, to name a few. We had many just really great creators and creative minds there. They all agreed to watch the films that we had selected for competition and bestow awards, which can be very important for filmmakers. And then in the world of XR, which we're talking about right now, I kind of hit the ground running and pivoted to speak to our creators about the possibility of creating a virtual exhibition. So I was lucky enough to have a good relationship with Oculus and talking about the potential of doing something like this in conjunction with the live festival in the future. And this was the perfect time to see if it was possible to actually execute it in a very, very small window of time, which I'm very proud to say and very happy to say we did successfully.
You did. That was amazing. And I want to know, because this is ongoing, the Tribeca Talks are happening still on Facebook, and you're still offloading a lot of content. What lessons have you learned about, and how will you prepare for future contingency plans?
Well, I mean, I think we're still learning. This is something that we're moving so fast as we're producing. You mentioned Tribeca Talks, which is an initiative that is live on Facebook. We have about 11 episodes that are set to go. 4 of them were focused on 360, on Cinema 360 specifically. And as we're producing these, you can see the production quality is getting better. We're figuring out exactly how to get our creators' word out there and how to get the word about the talks out there as well. But I think most importantly, we're having conversations behind the scenes with industry and creative minds just to see what people are thinking about for the future of their work that exists now, that it had the intention of premiering in 2020, and also what we're going to do in the future. Because I think this has proven that we're stepping into a new age right now. Nothing is going to go back to the exact way that it was before the lockdown and before this crisis. And we're all, working together to create these ideas. But I think something like the online exhibition of Cinema 360, that's something that really excited me, not just because we were able to salvage a piece of the festival, but because we were able to grow a global audience, which is something that we always talk about, particularly in the XR community, where this is a still relatively an emerging medium, where there are a lot of people that haven't yet adopted headsets, and they haven't quite wrapped their head around the idea of storytelling in VR. And just to be able to put this out there, expand the global reach, and expand the audience exponentially. We would have had, for Cinema 360, we would have had around 6,000 audience members throughout the 9-day period of that. In conjunction with Oculus and being able to do the virtual exhibition as we did, we ended up with over 43,000 viewers across the program. Amazing. Over the same 9-day period. So it shows me that, this is something that we'd love to potentially continue and just explore different ways to share with those who don't necessarily have the access to the festival or the means to travel to the festival. And also,
I think I think that's an interesting point, because opening up access and having access to new platforms, whether it's HTC Vive or it's one of the game engines or something else like Steam, there are multiple ways of getting the content out there, and I'm seeing more of them emerge over time. Can you talk to us about what the drive? There are a number of different types of content that I think people are starting to consume, like, Animal Crossing has been huge, and then other things that are bringing people on board. Certainly with quality content like yours, I think that's going to be a lot faster. Can you talk to us about, the numbers of hits and also engagement that you've had? Because seeing them personally at Tribeca was very difficult because of the staging and the installations that you had.
Of course, yeah. As anyone who's attended a festival or an exhibition can tell you, throughput is a major issue when it comes to exhibiting XR work, specifically VR work. So to be able to do this kind of simultaneous screening it immediately eliminates that issue. I think that there's something to be said for convening people physically. I still believe in that. I believe that is very important for just the connection and some business to be done. That a lot of that can be face to face, but these kinds of numbers and this kind of engagement is exciting to me, because there are also people who have adopted the medium of VR, but they are playing games or they're seeking connection, and those are great uses of the medium. But storytelling is my passion. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to make sure that was available.
So tell us about storytelling and the way people tell stories in XR. And by the way, those of you who are watching, feel free to send us questions. And Loren, if you have any questions for the audience, please let me know. But in the meanwhile, I'd like to know how storytelling is different in XR, and what is particularly attractive to you about this as opposed to 2D filmmaking.
Well, I see them as totally separate things. That's the thing that's interesting. My background is in traditional film, and I started as a programmer at Tribeca, programming traditional film only. But I always had a very keen interest in interactive media, in gaming, and in storytelling that allowed an audience some form of agency. And when the technology began to catch up, or I should say, when the consumer technology began to catch up with the storytelling possibilities, that's when I saw a real opportunity to kind of join the team that was already working. So Ingrid Kopp started Storyscapes 8 years ago now at Tribeca, and the first year there was no VR, but there were many different types of interactive storytelling. I think the VR portion of it is something that some viewers are able to understand in a way a little bit better, just because they are versed in cinematic storytelling. And while there are some similarities, that allows kind of a doorway in. But then the agency and all of the things that you were talking about before are what are the mind blowers, right? When people have their first VR experience, it's very hard for them to go back. And then they also understand that there is a huge difference between traditional 2D cinema and VR. And it's not like VR is on the path to, or XR is on the path to take out traditional cinema. They're very different mediums, and the stories can be told in very different ways. And that is so exciting to me. And also being able to be a part of that, be a part of it now. I don't think any of us have had this opportunity in our lives to be there at the beginning of something in this way and kind of help to shape what the narrative looks like.
Tell me, you've seen, speaking of shaping the narrative, you're selecting the films that go forward. Talk to me about the submissions and the change in the evolution of the type of content that you've seen, because you have people submitting from around the world. You've got what I think 46% are women, so you get a broad representation, or at least of both genders anyway. Tell me about the kinds of submissions that you've been seeing and the breadth and depth of the quality.
Well, it's been increasing each year, which is really exciting. When I first started programming VR and XR work, I had to rely on travel alone because submissions were not a possibility. Everything had to be done. Everything was curatorial, so everything was about either visiting artist studios, begging and borrowing for headsets that weren't yet available to see works in progress. That has all changed. Now that we have access to the hardware and to the technology to see the work, it makes it a lot easier to communicate with artists and be able to accept submissions and see works that are in progress, and really be able to kind of visualize what the exhibition can be like for the year. But travel is still a huge component, as there are so many great festivals that are doing amazing curatorial work in the XR space. I find it my responsibility to go and visit those festivals and see what everyone is doing, and meet up with the community and kind of just see which way the wind is blowing, kind of visualize some trends and see what storytellers are doing, because they are the ones that I find that storytellers and developers and creative technologists are working hand in hand to push the medium forward. And as a curator, it's just my responsibility to listen to them, watch what they're doing, and try and shape it for my own platform.
It's interesting that you mentioned the creative technologists, because I went to New York Film Academy to learn virtual reality, and it was relatively new. You didn't see much of a crossover between people studying traditional film and then actually branching over. It tended to be more the creative technologists who thought, or the artists who thought, how can I take this forward? So are you seeing the tech driving creative, or is it more artists and philosophers trying to use this as a medium to reach people more emotionally? Who are the people who are really pushing this forward from your perspective? Because you've had everyone from Courtney Cogburn, who's a professor at Columbia, to some kids who are in, I think it was Australia, Aboriginals, create work. And it's extraordinary to see the breadth of
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you mentioned that last piece that you mentioned, Future Dreaming, which was by Sutu, but in collaboration with a bunch of Aboriginal teens in Australia. Those are the kinds of works that show you that it's the creative vision and the technology that is pushing it. I think that at a certain point there were kind of creators being beholden to the technology and the hardware, and at another point they were able to create kind of a very important conversation and important collaboration with the technology, with the developers, to say, here's my vision. Is this something that can be accomplished with this technology? And we've seen that happen so many times over the past 3 or 4 years, where there's something that was previously impossible and is now very almost second nature when you're watching film. I think you might have heard my 4-year-old wandered in just now. I love working from home.
That's so cute. Well, listen, I wanted to ask you, as a father of 2 adorable small ones, how would you feel about traveling? We talked about how fundamental it is to travel and see things, and that's how I know some of the guests that we hear, from either the VR Days Europe, which is one of my favorite, or Venice, or whatever. How comfortable will you feel in the next 3 months or 6 months? And how does everybody else on watching this feel about traveling for work and for events?
I have observations. I think we really need to be very careful about, and we need to listen to the medical professionals and see what is safe and how safe it truly is to travel. I think that obviously as regulations are kind of loosening, you don't want them to be too loose. You want to be able to keep things under control and keep the spread of the disease under control. So I don't believe that travel, I mean, this is my personal belief, I don't believe that travel is safe at the moment, and I don't believe that it will be truly safe for a few months to come. That said, I do believe that this is hopefully a blip. This is something that we will be able to overcome through science, through technology, and through cooperation, just as human beings. This is one of the few times where the entire globe is being affected by the same affliction. So I think we're all in a place to we're all in a place to make some decisions for ourselves and for others, and to protect each other. And I think right now it's probably not the best idea, but we'll have to see as the months progress.
Right. I agree with you in terms of waiting and seeing it and taking it from there. I guess one last question, if I may. You are, because you're on the international stage, and I see you as being one of the most prominent. Everyone talks about diversity, right? And I often get calls about, hey, you need 50% women, or people will call me and say, can you speak because we need women? And I think that's really flattering. But I mean, I also say to them, okay, can we also talk about the number of Blacks, Hispanics, Latinos on stage? Asians. I want to see a full breadth of society on stage, not just a gender balance. How do you feel about being one of the only in all of the rooms that you go to around the world?
It's obviously not what I would like to see more diversity on the entertainment stage across the board, in front of the camera, behind the camera, the gatekeepers. I think we just need to diversify, period. That's also another thing that really actually drew me to XR, is that in the same way that I say that, we've never had the opportunity to be at the dawn of a new medium in this way. I think that that's important in recognizing exactly how we can change things for diversity and representation and inclusion in this medium. There's no real reason for us to have to play catch up for it. There are certain barriers to entry in terms of hardware and the pricing of the hardware and the availability of the hardware, but I think there are a lot of great organizations that are working to combat that. And I think
yeah, it's definitely exciting. I mean, I think it's a great medium for people to also, sometimes they can take different avatars and different appearances, and maybe it also changed the way we connect with people, because that's no longer, the shell is no longer the thing that we're responding to. So there's a kind of an exciting ambiguity, I think, about interacting with people in VR.
Yeah, I think there's also, in terms of storytelling, I think that there's something really exciting to be said for that, in that if you are telling your own story and you haven't really gotten the opportunity to have a place on the stage like that, but people are able to kind of step into your story and feel a kinship that they wouldn't necessarily feel in a traditional film, I think that can be very powerful. Storytellers are very smart in allowing audiences to walk in their shoes and really understand the possibilities there.
Wonderful. Well, Loren, I thank you so much. We're going to bring on Michel Reilhac from the Venice Film Festival to tell us about his experience and his projections to bring on his film festival, the Venice Film Festival, in September. Michel, bienvenue.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you are currently joining us from Amsterdam, is that correct?
Hi.
You're joining us from Amsterdam, correct? Can you hear me?
Yes, that's where I live.
So tell me, you are planning to go forward with the Venice Film Festival this year. Tell us about your considerations. Tell us about
your.
Yes,
I can hear you.
Tell us about your plans to go forward with the Venice Film Festival this year.
Well, we haven't. Yes. We're Well, we have about 3 months, because the dates when we will be running in Venice will be September 2nd to 12th. So we have the luxury, the relative luxury, to have a little bit of time to plan. We will be holding the festival in real life. But we know for sure, and Loren just spoke about the reasons for this, that much fewer people than usual will be able to travel to Venice. So it will be a more limited scope of people attending. This is a reason why we are working on a very strong, remotely accessible version, building a platform, a VR platform that will be accessible through VR headsets, but also through PCs, that will allow people who cannot make it to Venice to not just watch our selection of VR experiences, but also facilitate people meeting people virtually on the platform, and using that platform as a creative tool for VR artists as well.
Wow. So what platform is this? And this is the first time you're using it?
Could you hear me?
Now I can. What platform is it? And is this the first time you're using it?
Yes. Yes, we're working on it. We're giving ourselves the whole month of May to decide. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Let me try and see if it's better if I connect through my
I can hear you now.
cell phone.
I can hear you now. You might just want to turn off the phone connection. So it's my understanding that you are moving forward with this, but there's a contingency plan, and the contingency plan has been developed with VR Room.
Yes.
Is that correct?
I'm trying to connect through my phone in case.
No, just turn off the phone. You're going to just confuse your telecoms, the Dutch telecom.
I'm trying to connect through my phone in case. I'm now connected through my cell phone. Okay. I'm now connected through my cell phone. Now I can't. Oh, gee. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, well, the plan is really to look at the crisis that we need to address as an opportunity to truly consider what it means to strategize differently, and see the kind of event that we're doing as a festival as something that can now become hybrid. So the idea of creating a platform through which the program will be available and where people will be able to meet each other, we're seeing this as a strategic choice, something that is not just a temporary solution to a crisis, but we see this as a shift. We see this as an opportunity to change the very DNA of the event that we are as a festival, and consider that the physical dimension of the event will be the same. I mean, will be matched with an online dimension accessible through VR and specific to VR. So we're really seeing this as an opportunity to become a hybrid event, and the platform will be designed as such. So we're working on it right now.
So tell us, if this is a structural change, it sounds like this could be something, a long-term investment in what you believe to be, worthwhile endeavor. Because Venice also was one of the first to separate immersive as a category. So talk to us about your thinking about immersive in the long run. Do you think that one day this might even outpace 2D films as the default the standard?
I think VR is definitely, we know by now, a new art form. It's a new language. It is inspired by a lot of the things we have learned in the language of film, of cinema, but it is definitely a different art form. And Loren talked about it and said that it is very specific in the way we tell stories. So we are still in that perception, which is the same as how cinema was perceived at the very beginning, when people saw it as an extension from theater. But very quickly, it proved that it was a language in its own right. I think we're the same with VR. We're still seeing it as a cousin, as a brother, or as a sister to cinema, but it's proving little by little to be much more and to be an art form in itself. So the future is not about VR outstaging cinema. It's VR and immersive media finding its own space, its own language, and we're just beginning to build that language. So we're referring to cinema as if it was a competition, but it's not a competition. The same way we still have printed books and we love reading books in the age of everything digital. We're going back to buying vinyl records for the very specific quality of the sound on a vinyl record. So with VR, we are going to have a separate world that it is opening, and the future will allow us to sometimes watch flat films just because it will provide us the same kind of vintage pleasure that we have in reading books. The quality of the experience is related to the physicality of the medium, while VR will
and yet at the same time. And yet, by some time, people consider VR the ultimate time capsule because you can capture in or space and then move forward and even recreate it with CGI in a very, very faithful way. So how do you feel about that? I mean, I feel like 2D is much more, it's author-driven because they're imposing a narrative and a point of view with the cuts and the decisions and the close-ups, whereas with VR, you have to really change that. And we'll have to ask Tupac about this, but it's a different way of storytelling. With the authorship, I mean, that I don't know if there's a lag, but
I have to disagree, Catherine. Take it for granted that language, a vocabulary, a grammar that we understand, beyond our specific cultures. But we forget that it took almost 25 years for close-ups, for time treatment, for acceleration, for shortcuts, for the art of editing to find itself and to build itself. We're doing this for VR now, and I feel that there are authors already that are independent artists in the same right as film. We're just learning the art that makes VR so specific and different. It is space, but I think more and more it will be the interactivity and the agency that the viewer has within a VR story world. That's what makes the big difference.
Talk to me about the Venice Film Festival. First of all, you got the Venice Biennale, and where Tupac's work was shown last year, and the Venice Film Festival, and again about how you carved out this specific immersive as its own unique category.
The Venice Biennale, as the name, is a sort of umbrella organization, one of the largest cultural organizations in the world, publicly funded. And it has under its wings the Art Biennale, the Architecture Biennale, and among others, the International Film Festival of Venice. Venice VR is the only official VR competition in such a big festival in the world today. We're the only ones to have an international jury, to give awards on the same level as the feature films that are part of the festival. So it is something that we started actually 4 years ago with a pilot edition, and this year will be our fourth proper edition. And
Wow.
we show only world premieres and international premieres, and we treat VR as if, or at least on the exact same level as feature films. We give it the
Wow.
space, we give it the time, we give it the recognition and the promotion that feature films have and that we feel VR deserves.
That's a tremendous commitment, because we haven't seen that kind of commitment. I mean, 4 years ago was really visionary, considering the fact that, to Loren's point earlier, a lot of people still are struggling to get headsets, and only now are we beginning to see the tipping point. So well done for identifying this early on as a very important medium. Talk to me about your personal feeling about the emotions that can be driven through VR, and and how you feel that the installation is an integral part of that experience.
When you use the word installation, I assume that you mean those experiences that can be shared in a physical space that has some kind of connection with the world that is experienced within the headset. So that can be done
Exactly.
through either live performers that are interacting with the viewer. It can be done through sets, progressive sets that you walk through as you go through the experience. And this is the most sophisticated expression of what immersive art can be. It's also the most complex and the most expensive. And by nature, it is similar to the logic of the performing arts. Tupac, who's going to talk after me, had this amazing piece last year that we showed in Venice called Cosmos Within Us. But under that form, it was performed for one spectator by up to 10 different people. Now Tupac has evolved, and he will tell us about how he's making it bigger. But there is this. The art of the installation in VR is definitely the most sophisticated and the most privileged way of watching VR. But I do think that what is the two new frontiers in VR today, and how the art of telling immersive stories is progressive, is one, with the progress of social platforms where people can be together experiencing things together at the same time and share about it at the same time. And the second is definitely interactivity. When it's one thing to have the agency to look around you, to be free to look around you wherever you want within the 360-degree sphere of the story world, but it's something else when you can start actually move up towards a character, or pick up an object, or decide to go through a door and move through the space. That kind of interactivity is what makes the new, one of the most exciting new frontiers of today.
I think the interactivity is absolutely key, and I think that to your point, Tupac is definitely one of the leaders in this space, because it blends the theatricality of the physical space and the interactivity on so many more dimensions. If we're thinking about how the huge, I'm thinking about the cost implications of some of the installations that were canceled, say at Tribeca and others, and it's kind of a shame that they're not able to show those. So what's the future of distribution look like for you, for many of the artists and many of the creations that have been developed for these kinds of festivals?
I think that one of
Do you see a new ecosystem?
I think one of the possibilities for the immediate future is to have curated platforms, so that we can clearly identify where we can go to watch a certain kind of content. We're not going to go to the same platform if we want to play games or see zombie stuff. then as if we want to go somewhere where we want to see high quality 360 documentaries or interactive fictions. So I think the future is about, clearly designing curated platforms that will appeal to a specific audience. But clearly distribution right now is, at least until before the crisis, was location-based entertainments, places where you would go outside of your home to experience the VR content. The future, in my mind, is much more about individual access, when people will start feeling compelled to own a VR headset. They will become the public of tomorrow, and I think the real market for distribution for VR content will start being significant once the level of individual equipment, home equipment of headsets will start growing. And I think this is going to be another probably 3 years before that starts happening in any significant way.
We're going to ask everybody if they have a VR headset or if they plan to get one, and see what the polls in our comments. Thank you so much for these comments. I think that one last question is about the difference between art and commerce, because I think about the Venice Art Fair, the Biennale, every 2 years. I had the pleasure of visiting the first one when I was 16. I've lived half of my life in Europe, so I've visited many, many times for that and for the film festival as well. And I wonder how, what about the collecting side? Can you imagine also there being an evolution where, say, the Pace Gallery or Hauser and Wirth or Gagosian, some of the big galleries start to have a collection of VR where you have the installations and the experiences that are then collectible, as opposed to a commercial art form?
Yes. Well, what's very interesting is that what's very interesting is that Marina Abramovich is getting ready to be the very first VR artist to auction one of her new works at Christie's in Los Angeles soon. It'll be a first, and of collectors is ready to welcome VR pieces in their collection. So yes, I do think that there will be a space where VR works will be collectibles.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. I think that I really do imagine that this is the beginning of something much larger, especially when you think about XR. There are a number of artists working with XR, AI, AR, and the combination. And Christie's has been one of the first to move forward in this space. And I think it's interesting to watch this particular intersection of technology, film, and art at such a high level. And you're doing an exceptional job. And I really hope you are able to go forward live in September, and at the same time to expand your business by sharing that online as well to a broader audience. So thank you so much. I would like to introduce now Tupac Martir, who it's almost, his CV is so long. Even just researching for this, I've watched hours and hours, and I still feel as there's never enough time to embrace the breadth of his work. Vogue has called him one of the most important creators of our time. He's worked with, as I said, some of the best minds, from fashion to art to theater, opera, you name it. And so I'm really incredibly pleased to have him on board. Tupac Martir, I'm going to unmute your mic. Can you unmute it?
I'm good.
Unmute his mic.
I got it.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I am so delighted to have you on board today. It's almost, your CV is so large. I almost don't know where to begin. You were born in Mexico. You currently live in the UK. You've been everywhere around the world ever since then. You started off as a traditional artist, and working in theater and opera. And much of your work has departed since then into a very fantastical, beautiful realm. Some of the highlights include working with Alexander McQueen, who, as we know, is just, he's in a category in himself in terms of his creativity. Can you talk to us about where the richness of this storytelling tradition? Is it part of, you grew up in Mexico and spent a lot of time with your aunt, who is an artist and writer, magical realism. Where does all this come from? And then why is XR a good expression for all of these different paths and interests? It's a long question, I know.
No, but I mean, at the end of the day, is I blame it on a few things. My parents are economists, so they're bookworms, and they have enough PhDs and master's degrees to brag about that. I can't. When I was recently born, I was like 2 weeks old. I got taken away by a writer, and she took care of me for 2 years while my parents were studying. So I have this idea that while I was really, really young, she fed all these stories in my head, and then slowly they started to come out slowly through the progress of the different art forms. I also think that it comes from my heritage. I'm indigenous. My dad's Michel. You can see a mask there and a mask there, and there's one here, and there's one when you enter my studio, and then 7 others when you pass it, and so I'm surrounded by this kind of artwork and the whole shamanic elements that come from that culture. And I think I remember when I was in school, I used to have every other Friday, I will have 3 professors plus an invitee to come in and critique my work towards my first exhibition. And I'll never forget one time, one of them asking me, how can you place yellows and pinks and light blues in places that technically don't make sense? But when I see them there, they look aesthetically pleasing. And I didn't answer the question. John Dean, who was my mentor, is the one that answered, and he said it's called genetics. Because it's something that just comes in from what I have, and so that for me, that's where my stories come from. And I carry one of these everywhere I go. I write on them and I scribble on them, and I have all this information. I'm researching all the time. I'm looking for things. I'm impatient with things, and I'm curious about things, and that just drives the ideas of going and saying, that's it, let's go that way. That's the idea. How do we make it happen, or what are the things that I can put together to make it happen?
And you've worked with so many different art styles. Talk to us about the emotional element. I mean, obviously, working in VR, it is one of the most profoundly moving mediums to really touch people's spirits and their souls. So why, what people could say, why didn't you just stick with that and try to explore that deeper? Instead, you exploded that. So talk to us about the evolution into VR and where you'd like to take it next.
Well, I mean, when we started looking into VR, I remember we grabbed our first cardboard in 2015, and we went, oh, this is interesting. And then very much in the realm of what we do, for the first year, we didn't do anything. We went to meetups, we read, we watched stuff, we enriched ourselves with everything that was around to see what were the techniques, what were we borrowing stuff from, what was needed from here. And so by the luck of looking at it and actually studying it from the outside, I realized that it had a lot of similarities with performance. And I have a master's degree in performance, and so I was looking at it and thinking, okay, this is the reason. I've been designing in 360 since I was 20 years old. So not because I thought 360, but because I thought about environments. I thought about, how do you need to feel? What is it that I want you to feel when you walk in? How do
It's interesting.
Yeah.
you have worked with major performers like Beyonce doing their set design and all of the theatricality that goes around it. And then you've also done films where you craft the journey, the emotional journey that people have to go on. So
it's the same thing.
So it feels like, yeah, you take that theater, but then you also have a technical approach, don't you? This isn't just emotional.
But the thing is, at the end of the day, it's the same thing. Whether it's a fashion show, whether it's a concert, whether it's an XR experience, whether it's a film, whether it's just me doing tumbles over here, yeah? All of it needs to be structured, you know? It's not just me going, hey, look at this, you know? In order for that to make it interesting, it needs to have an entire build to it. And you need to understand, what is that build? What are you trying to tell? What is the emotion that I want out of you? You know, I got once asked, why does Cosmos end the way that it ends? And why do you have to spill it out for me? And I said, it's very easy, because it will be a monstrosity from myself as an artist to let you out of that room naked in that way. I have to close that circle, because that's my job as an artist. If I don't do it, then I'm not doing my job. And that's what it does, is whether it's a set, where it's lights, where it's always thinking about what is the story that I'm trying to tell. You know, I always claim that what we do is not just make things pretty. If you want something pretty, there's always me. If you want, what we do is we make sure that every element that we use is a character, and that is a light. That's the camera that we use. It could be the engine, the render, the form. All those things for us are characters that exist in the space, are characters to the story that we're trying to tell. So, you know, so that's just the ethos of how we work.
So I'd like to drill down a little bit and give the audience more specificity, because you picked up a headset in 2015, and already by 2018 you were at Venice, and you were already showing at some of the international festivals. Can you talk to us about specifically some of the work that you developed and the process of onboarding that and creating out those concepts? And then we'll get to Cosmos after that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we grabbed it in 2015. We didn't do anything with it. And then in 2016, we got a commission from Dior to do a piece for them, which got seen by 3.2 million people, which is just ridiculous if you think that's 2016. But that gave us a very good understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And then immediately after Dior, we went in and shot Sicuri. And that was the exploration of projection, dancers, makeup, movement, sound, lighting, layering. You know, so it became this massive canvas of, let's play around and see how you understand the space. How do you understand the sound? How do you understand what's going on? What are the lights doing? What happens when the light looks at you this way? What happens, you know, what happens if I just do really slow transitions? What happens if I don't speed it up? You know, in that, but Sicuri actually took us, we shot it, and we actually didn't finish it until about a year later, because we couldn't get the image to look the way that we wanted it out of the camera. So we had to wait for updates of it until eventually got to the right point, you know, because we weren't about to put something for the sake of putting it out there. And so we waited and we waited and we waited. And then in 2017, you know, I got very lucky to go and see, you know, we all went to Venice. And I already had an idea in my head about something that I wanted to do, which was the beginning of Cosmos. And then we got to Venice, and Michel opened us up to this amazing world in which I got to see Drummy Close, and I saw Alice, and I went, right, we are in the right path. You know, performance is the way to go. And all of a sudden I was like, but I really want to see the performance. I want to see what's going on in the background. I want to see, and that kind of added more to what we were thinking that Cosmos should be, you know. And then somewhere in there, I did a piece for Boss in 360 for Jason Wu, in which I said, you know what, let's just stick a camera, let's play with it, let's play with form, let's play with the idea of what is a front row, you know, because at the time people were just sticking a camera in the middle of the catwalk and that shit. But we went and did things that were actually interesting and dynamic. And it was like, okay, how can we evolve within these elements to create something different? And that's kind of, at some point we got to work into Cosmos, and we said, right, now let's start breaking down our story, the way we would want to do the story, but also what are the different techniques that need to go into each one? What are the visual elements of each one? What is the interactivity with each one? What is the smell? What is the sound? And develop the piece in the way that we create a show. In 2000,
now when you create,
we debut Nierka is based on this series of laws that you're not allowed to break, and elements that need to interact with each other, and how if you are watching something and that sound is generating this vibration in your brain, you are expecting for an image to exist on the top right of your vision. So if I put an image on the top right, it means that it's creating a cohesiveness. So therefore, your brain will adopt it and go, oh, great, I can understand this. But what happens when I don't put it on the right, but I put it on the left? And all of a sudden, the vibration against what you're seeing gets destroyed. And therefore, I'm creating a reaction within you that actually makes my story, without you realizing it, push it to where I want you to go. And that kind of went all the way down into Cosmos.
So that is, I think, that the driving element is the ability to influence emotion in a much more powerful way. And I think that ultimately that is why this is such a powerful tool for artists, and specifically theater, because it is supposed to reveal so many truths about human nature and our relationships and things that are supposed to move us and touch us. But I wonder, rather than, as I hear you speak, it feels like instead of transporting people into another world, you're integrating multiple worlds. Cosmos Within Us had, I saw the premiere in New York, and you described it in last year in VR Days Europe in November. You talked about how, you wanted the person who's in the headset to experience something, but also the people who are watching that person. Would you have designed that differently if the headsets were where you could see each other? And also talk to us about the different elements that you included in part of that theater and the experience.
I mean, you could, but the idea of Cosmos was always to be driven by a single person experience from the get go, and we knew that we were going into a realm of budget, if you want to say, of 15 people for one. Why, but it's the craft. It's how can I create something that is just that memorable for the person that is in the headset. But that's when, after all this playing and working, this is where performative art comes from, and then this is where we're really driving our work. We're driving our work to do more performative art more than anything else, because I do like the idea of creating a performance in different realities, and the person that our interactor has it in virtual reality, and our audience is having it in a physical reality.
Tell us about performative art and Cosmos Within Us, because we didn't get a chance to run the clip, but I have shared them on LinkedIn before this. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? I mean, you have somebody in the headset, and they're recounting the story of their experience of losing memory, of going through Alzheimer's, and at the same time you have dancers, you have interactive music, you have the audience, you have smells. Tell us about all of the elements that you incorporated in that piece.
So the idea is, I say it's basic. Obviously, it's basic because I've said it many times. So you have one interactor, person in the headset, who in reality we all perform towards. So you have what I call the son et lumière side of things. So the vision and lights. So they're all led by me, who I'm directing the piece live. The voiceover actor, who's live. Cello, violin, keys that are live. Depending on the show, we might add an extra viola and an extra violin. You have a sound engineer who's actually mixing all the music live and the sound. Then you have, and I always go like this because that's how they're placed. To my left, you have the operator of Unreal Engine, because that's being played all in real time. Next to him, you have the camera director, because in shows that we go so big, we actually need to use cameras to show different angles that the audience won't get to see. Behind that, you have our sound designer, because we run an 11.2 surround sound system with open headphones. So our interactor will get sound in his headphones from the voiceover and certain ASRs and things like that come in. And then you have the entire audience also has headphones, so they can listen to exactly the same thing. And now we've expanded the 11.2 to now surround the entire area, so everybody is actually inclusive within the 11.2, whereas before they weren't. And then you have 2 dancers who are in charge of taste, smell, and touch. And so then you have the interactor who actually drives the story. And I say drive it because even though the story is always linear, and we're talking about Aiken, a 60-year-old man suffering from Alzheimer's disease, who goes back to his house to try to hold on to his last memories before they fade away. And at that moment, you realize that he's trying to not remember one memory as they come flooding back. And it's the trip through his memories and how he remembers things happening that we use Cosmos for. And in that, you have moments in which, you know, when you're in the old house, the space is darkly lit, and it smells like the rain's coming through, and you have all sorts of sounds that are hidden for the interactor to find. So in that case, we're waiting for the interactor to move around, and if I can see that they are getting tired of it, I can speed up things, I can move things around, I can trigger elements, I can ask for the music to get expanded, I can move them into the next scene. And so as I move into every single scene, I'm changing the dynamic of how the interactor is using every single space, but also the size that he has within the piece. You know, we always call we did a curve, and there's the line, and everything above the line is more real, anything underneath the line is more surreal. And those, once again, those laws went into the color palettes that we had, the way that the smells needed to work. So a smell on the upper side of the curve would be more real, you know, will smell like humidity, will smell like rain, whereas a smell that was in the southern part would actually be more emotional. What does childhood smell like? Childhood smells like bubble gum, you know. And by trying to combine what the smell with the vision, with the sound, with the voice, with it's all these elements that then generate the moment that you're in. And so every single interactor really has a different version, because maybe they're looking at a screen in the dome of memories, and because each screen has 30 seconds. If you just stare at this screen, then you see the 30 seconds here, but then you don't see any of the other memories. And then you turn around and we hide the rest of them, and then you see a new one. And so you always get them. The point was always for people to come out and go, did you hear the radio? No, but I heard the TV. There was no TV. There was no radio, you know, because we are playing with with this idea that you are having Alzheimer's. And so it was all these elements that we wanted to put together to finally create this feelings. At the end of the day, we all have somebody that we love that unfortunately has passed away or has moved away, or, you know, it was always about the idea of loss and what happens with loss, you know, and yes, the big theme is the loss of memory, but then we have a smaller theme that actually drives the whole story in order for the climaxes to join at the same time. And that, you know, that was the bit that we wanted to get to. That whether we resolved it or not resolved it is not to me to say, is actually for the audience.
You know, you raised so many questions. I don't even, it's hard to keep up with you. I wanted to ask you about two things, because one is the implications for mass media and even broadcast media. I mean, you have worked on across so many different kinds of media, but I don't think this is contained to theater. I feel like this has potential important implications for mass media. Can you imagine incorporating the two? Because you've done branded work, so maybe it's an extension of that.
I have a very heavy NDA in front of me that I can't say anything about. But yes.
Okay.
It's something that we're looking at and something that we're exploring quite heavily. But it has to be the right type of thing. It just can't be something for the sake of something.
Right. But I mean, as we see the draw, and Loren mentioned the number of people who logged on once all the assets were uploaded online and that had to be seen with a headset, and the numbers were exponentially higher than in real life. So the potential is clearly there. So the question is, if you were advising, let's just say, HBO or Warner Brothers or Netflix right now about how to incorporate XR into broadcast media, what would you say to them?
Call me. Because I have no, and I say that way because actually that's kind of what we're doing at the moment. We're developing a bunch of workflows and tools to understand what is the next thing within. I mean, you look at, don't go that far, Travis Scott on Fortnite. That concert had 12.28 million people. I mean, really? There is so much out there. But maybe it takes something like this for traditional media to finally start breaking away from it. Yeah? And breaking away from this idea that transmedia is going to solve the world, because it's not, because there's a whole lot of other things that can go and have overpassed that. Yeah. I'm not saying that certain elements of transmedia should not be kept. Of course they should be, because there's so many things that really work amazingly well, but there's elements that can be done that have to be part of it or exponentially moved into that side that could be absolutely incredible. But once again, it's, do you have a story, or are you just doing it for the sake of it? Yeah, because if you do it for the sake of it, it's gonna basically make people go off. Yeah, and if you do that and they turned off, chances are they're not gonna see something again or give another chance for at least another 5-6 months. So you need to make sure that the content that goes out there is good.
All right. Well, I think that there's definitely something we want to open up to the floor about in terms of how we can take this also for mass media. I'm thinking Truman Show, and then there was that other one where people have more agency, and that could be super exciting. But something specifically for you, Cosmos, is really also about touching the soul. And the pandemic has raised a lot of philosophical questions about, humankind that we have yet to process. So as we look at the exit strategy of this pandemic, and you mentioned creating a different world, a better world, what would you like to see come out of this? I mean, obviously not just reworking cinema and theater. What else would you like us to think about as we emerge from this, our own isolation?
So I'm gonna be the pessimistic on this one, okay? And I'm gonna be, because I unfortunately I've seen the dark side. I've met too many people to kind of know that. Unfortunately, as much as I want it to be better, I'm really scared that the moment that we come out, you're gonna have Coca-Cola, feel better about yourself. Clothes, feel good about yourself. There, travel, feel good about yourself. Ooh, remember the pandemic? Ooh, yeah, that was horrible. Yeah, ooh, take this. Ooh, and people are just gonna go, yes, 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 yes. Yeah, mass consumism, because they're gonna gaslight us without wanting to. Yeah. So if I could say, make sure something is, be aware of it. Yeah. Be completely aware of where you are when you come out, and almost like write yourself a letter or an email that you get in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, and see if all this promises, because there's a lot of things that it's very easy to do. It's always that classic guy who goes, "Oh God, if you help me from this, I'll never swear again," and then gets out of it, and then it's like, "Fuck yeah!" It's like it's immediately happening. And so, I want to believe that there's better things to come, and I think that there's a lot of creative people that are doing the right things. The question is their voice going to be allowed to be heard to do what is supposed to be done?
Well, it's a bit like New Year's resolutions, where we have to ask ourselves whether or not, what the voice is that needs to be heard. Gentlemen, I want to open this up to you generally and talk about, I know that, Loren, you have a number of advertisers and people who support you, from AT&T and HBO, Nespresso, etc. And Tupac, you mentioned Dior. Can we talk about some of the creative ways that we're seeing brands use this as a new medium? And I'm also going to start checking our responses from our friends at LinkedIn. So somebody take the floor and let me know what you think about the branded opportunities for XR.
I mean, I think this is a larger question about branded storytelling altogether. I think that anytime a brand is involved, the best thing that they can do is to sit back and let the creative run what is happening for the product, not for the product, but for the project. We have an entire section at Tribeca called Tribeca X, the X Awards, and what we do there is we're celebrating branded storytelling, but we're very, very careful, very conscious to make sure that nothing is perceived as an advertisement, because no one wants to be sold to, right? Like, you want to get great stories, but you don't want to have exactly what Tupac was just talking about and have people shoving things in your face. And the truth is, we do live in an opportunistic society, right? And brands could potentially use VR and XR for bad and not for good, because you're given while you're given agency, you're also placed into an environment that it can be a bit easier to be manipulated that way. So I think that you just have to be very careful about that. But there are some great pieces that brands have become involved with that you would never even know. You never even know that they are behind it. And I think that's the most important thing to understand, is that when brands recognize that creators and that artists are the ones that will make something special, then you're going to get something special.
Yeah, I always say, I always go back
Thank
to
you,
that.
Michel.
Oh.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, go ahead, Tupac. You.
No, I was going to say that one of the best pieces that I've ever made was a sponsor piece by Johnny Walker that actually had a reach of over 10 million people across 5 days, and it was all about the achievements of Mexicans, and for them to showcase their achievements. And if you ask me how much brand did we put, very little. How much input did they have? That much. They saw the final render. That's how much they saw. Because they kind of basically said, here's a bunch of cash, go and do what you need to do. Just make sure that it looks good. And I think that's when brands are in that way, where they can see a potential of being associated with a very good piece of art, with a very good piece of content that doesn't need to have that. I mean, Red Bull used to be amazing at it. I say used to because not anymore. But there was a law on Red Bull that you could only have one logo at any time on a camera.
I think there's an opportunity for people to capture the feel of a brand, as opposed to and take them transport you into their world, and show and not tell. Michel, I wonder if you can tell us about for the Venice Film Festival, if somebody were to say to you, we want to take over a space and we want to invite people into the world, what sort of confines would you set up for them?
The Venice Biennale is very, very proprietary of its brand, and is very reluctant to do this sort of things. And one of the reasons why the Art Biennale, the Architecture Biennale, what we do at the International Film Festival is, I believe, so strong. It is in part because they have been able to keep a sort of purity to the show. So we do have partnerships and collaborations, but they're very discreet, and it takes quite a sophisticated approach and a sophisticated strategy for a brand to understand that they can go through a sort of discrete branding of events and experiences like the ones, you know, in immersive media, to reap back the benefits of this kind of collaboration. My experience with different organizations beyond Venice is that very often the brands want a very immediate return on their investment in a very primary way, where they think it's an exposure for their brand, while like Tupac was saying, the most effective examples of branding you know, associated with a VR content are those that are the most discreet, and where the brand is not necessarily thrown into the face of the consumer all the time.
I think maybe. Oh, no, there she is. I thought we were on
sorry
our own
about
for a second, Catherine.
Are we on our own?
I just want to say, I think that sums it up really well. I've had a little bit of issues in the background. I also wanted to check some of the many greetings from around the world. We had from London, from Amsterdam, New York, Puerto Rico, everywhere around the world, and places in between. And so I'd like to thank everybody for watching. I think this has been a tremendously informative, interesting conversation about XR for entertainment, the different ways
She's
that.
back.
Yes.
We didn't know what to do.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's bandwidth problems over here. We're about to have a storm. So I think that's we've heard so many great insights into XR for entertainment, the different ways you have been able to maintain your tremendous brands, your brand properties, and to have this continuity strategy, this virtualization strategies. Michel, in your case, creating a backup that may ultimately be very rewarding for you as a new revenue stream. Loren, I think that the fact that you virtualized early and you saw some exponential results, I think is a really good example for us all. And Tupac, I'm really excited to hear about the future of broadcast entertainment and how we can make interactive and immersive art much more accessible. And I'm also going to make a list to myself and write myself in 3 months and revisit it as if it were a New Year's resolution. And I hope to hear from you all about what your resolutions, your emergence resolutions are. But in the meanwhile, I want to say thank you for being so gracious to join us today and to talk to our audience. This will be shared on VR Room, and I will share a clip with you online. And meanwhile, thank you all for participating. This has been tremendous and really fascinating, and I adore you all. You're doing great work.
Thank you for having us, Catherine. Great to see you all.
Thank you. Everyone be well.
At some point in the world, whenever we're allowed, and I will hug you like this.
Yes, the biggest.
Bye, everyone, and thank you again. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye.